The Basics of Economics by Tony Cleaver. Some observers allege that we have squandered the riches of the earth in creating inequitable opulence, catering for the greed of a few powerful parties, whilst ignoring the needs of all other inhabitants of the planet. In order to address the truth or otherwise of this allegation, it is worth pointing out at the outset the difference between matters of fact and those of opinion. Simply put, between questions of positive economics, which can be answered by resort to hard evidence, and those of normative economics, which require the application of the value judgment. That the earth's riches are consumed more by some than by others can be demonstrated by comparing the purchasing power of an average citizen in a third world country and a developed country. Another yardstick would be to compare the consumption of primary energy sources of the average person in each country. It's a direct measure of how much of a basic and essential resource, such as oil, is being used up by differing peoples. The UK's, United Kingdom's, National Health Service is a planned system of health provision that aims to provide free access to medical services to all Britons that require it. Set up in 1947, it's a huge organization that provides nationwide coverage with relatively little competition from the private sector. The National Health Service is a state monopoly. That is an immense and only purchaser of very large quantities of medical equipment, drugs, doctors and nurses, and so it drives prices down. It is also a state monopoly, that is, a single nationwide producer which is able to plan a network of hospitals and healthcare services that can avoid wasteful duplication and underemployment of resources. The highest level of satisfaction for an individual is at a point of equilibrium. It's the combination of goods that best maximizes his utility. Economists have invented a unique way to map an individual's tastes and preferences on a two-dimensional diagram called an indifference map, and it shows lines which illustrate higher and lower levels of satisfaction, and when taken together map out the shape of a consumer's preferences, just as contours lines map out the shape of the land. The map of indifference curves or preference lines shows increasing levels of utility as consumption of both goods increases from zero. The closer together or further apart are the lines, the faster or slower an increase in consumption leads to increasing utility. A price fall of any one good that features in an individual's regular shopping list represents not only the opportunity to increase purchases of that good itself, but also, since it represents a marginal change in real income, it opens the opportunity to alter purchases of other goods as well. The more a certain good takes up an important slice of a person's budget, however, the more its price change will affect that individual's overall pattern of purchases. In the case of demand for one product from all consumers added together, we would construct a market demand curve which would show that as the price of one item increases, demand for it will fall, and vice versa, assuming all other factors influencing the market remain unchanged. The slope of the demand curve illustrated is important. It shows just exactly how much demand will contract as price increases a little, or conversely, how much demand extends as price falls. The slope of the demand curve thus helps to represent the responsiveness or elasticity of demand consequent to a change in price. All things being equal, the flatter the demand curve, the more responsive or price elastic is demand. If a 5% fall in price is made by a 20% extension in demand, then we can say that demand is very price elastic. Elasticity is measured as the ratio of the percentage change in quantity to the percentage change in price. In this case, equal to 20 over 5 or 4. Conversely, a steep demand curve illustrates ceteris paribus, a less responsive or inelastic relationship to a price change. Goods and services that are price sensitive have a ratio of price elasticity greater than 1. Goods and services for which there are no or few substitutes will have a price elasticity of less than 1, e.g., change in the price of oil. Generally speaking, the more one good can be substituted for another in one's pattern of spending, the more price elastic it is likely to be in demand. In practice, many other factors other than price may play a role in the demand shift. This will include factors such as changes in consumer incomes, the world climate, industry advertising, tastes and preferences, etc. A contraction or extension in demand caused by an increase or decrease in price is illustrated by a movement along the demand curve. A fall or rise in demand caused by any other exogenous change is illustrated by a shift in the whole curve. A two-dimensional diagram can only illustrate the interaction between two variables. In this case, the effect of price on demand. An increase in price is an endogenous change, that is to say, within the dimensions of the model, and its effect can be studied on the dependent variable, causing a fall in demand illustrated by a contraction along the demand curve. A change in some other factor outside the model, like say advertising, is an exogenous change, and this causes the relationship between the two original variables to shift. A monopoly is a single large firm that sells its product in a marketplace with no effective rival. It is a situation governments all over the world are obligated to restrict, especially for essential goods, to protect customers who would otherwise be at the mercy of the monopolist who will change anything to maximize profits. In practice, the government will not allow a monopolist to control anything beyond 25% of the market share. The result, therefore, is competition occurs between a small number of very large firms, and this market structure is known as oligopoly. Economies of scale provide one explanation for oligopolies being able to resist dilution of their market power share by the entry of new businesses. Other methods include technical factors, e.g. aerospace, the oil industry, and in pharmaceuticals, where the capital threshold is simply immense. According to what Keynes called the paradox of thrift, while savings seem to be a value for the individual, if a whole community saves, then aggregate incomes fall. And so long as savings and investments are out of line, there is no guarantee the national income will remain stable. According to mainstream or neoclassical economics, The supply of savings in a country rises as the rate of interest reward for savings increases. Conversely, the demand for funds for investments will fall if borrowers have to pay too high a price. The two conflicting objectives meet at the market equilibrium rate R, where the aggregate total savings just equals the aggregate total of investments at Q. Depression or a recession is a time of rising unemployment and in the extreme deflation, that's falling prices. When prices are falling, though it seems welcome to the individual consumer, for the economy as a whole, it is dangerous because people will stop spending, deferring spending to a future date when prices would even be lower. If everyone stops spending, then the circular flow of money, consumption, and incomes in the country will inevitably fall. The national income goes down and unemployment will certainly rise. Keynes argued that the main determinant of the volume of savings in an economy is not the market price of money, but the level of income. The higher the incomes, the more money is set aside as savings. Keynesian macroeconomists further argued that the demand for funds for investments, the key stimulus to the economy, is neither primarily determined by rates of interest nor levels of national income, but by the expectation of future profits. If the outlook is profitable, high interest on borrowing will not dissuade the eager investor. The important 20th century policy recommendation derived from Keynesian thinking was that if private markets were too volatile to keep injections, which are investments, equal to leakages, which are savings, at the full employment level of national income required, then governments had to intervene. That governments should increase their own spending when aggregate demand was otherwise too low and decrease their spending when aggregate demand was as high as to be inflationary. Such a policy recommendation was known as demand management. The government expenditure in education, health, transport, and defense acts as an exogenous injection into the domestic economy, whereas taxes act as a leakage to reduce people's incomes and spending. But just as he challenged the orthodoxy of classical economics, which preceded him, so other economists have since had to overcome the intellectual stranglehold that the Keynesian paradigm exerted in the post-war years. Milton Friedman has been in the forefront in challenging both the Keynesian notions that market economics are not self-stabilizing and that they therefore need government macroeconomic regulation. Friedman and other neoclassical economists do not dispute there is a role for government intervention in microeconomics, e.g., to break up monopolies and promote competition among suppliers. But they argue that there is more likelihood that government spending at macroeconomic level will be actually destabilizing and lead to more problems of unemployment and inflation rather than the opposite. The neoclassical position, at its extreme, asserts that Keynesian theory gives governments the excuse to increase spending beyond budgets, and once you let this particular genie out of the bottle, you will never get it back in. Inflation, Friedman argued, was and is the result of central authorities allowing excessive monetary growth. Cut back the money supplies and you cure the problem. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries was formed in 1960 in an accord between original members Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. But it was not until the USA, in particular in 1973, began to import increasing amounts of oil as its own supplies fell short of demand that OPEC could act as a successful cartel. The spark that lit the oil crisis was the 1973 October War between Arabs and Israelis, when OPEC shut off oil supplies in retaliation to Western support of Israel. The price of world oil soared 400% between October 1973 and January 1974.